The strangest part of the Zanfretta case did not come from a book, it did not come from a television interview, and it did not come years later after the story had already become famous. It came over a radio. On the night of December 6th, 1978, a private security guard was patrolling the hills above Genoa in northern Italy. His name was Pier Fortunato Zanfretta. He was 26 years old. That night, he was sent to check a country villa known as Casa Nostra. The gate was open. The front door was open. And at first, everything looked like a break-in. Zanfretta reported the problem to his supervisor, stepped out of his patrol car, and moved toward the house. A few moments later, his voice came back through the radio. This time, he was not calm. He was shouting. His supervisor asked him if he was being attacked by men. Zanfretta answered, "No, they are not men." Then the line went dead. When his colleagues reached the villa, they found him outside. He was on the ground. His gun was gone. He was cold, frightened, and barely responsive. There were no burglars, no vehicle leaving the property, no simple explanation waiting in the garden, only the open villa, a strange mark in the grass, and a man who kept insisting that what he had seen that night had not been human. Welcome to the Pale Myth. Tonight, we examine one of Italy's most disturbing, unexplained cases. A case that began as a possible burglary, became a police investigation, and slowly turned into one of the most controversial alleged encounters in European UFO history. This is the story of the Zanfretta Encounter. In 1978, Pier Fortunato Zanfretta worked as a private night watchman. His job was not unusual. He drove through quiet roads after dark. He checked villas and country homes. He looked for open gates, broken doors, and signs of theft. In the hills around Torriglia, this was normal work. Many homes in the area were empty for long periods. Some belonged to people who lived elsewhere. Others were only used during holidays. At night, these houses stood dark behind walls and trees. For a security guard, that meant long hours alone. Most nights were boring. A locked gate, a dark window, a quick radio message. Then the next property. Zanfretta was not famous before the incident. He was not known as a writer. He was not known as a paranormal researcher. He was a working man with a patrol route. And that is why the first report is so important. Because before the newspapers, before the hypnosis, and before the arguments, there was only a guard doing his job. On December 6th, he was patrolling near Marzano, a small area in Torriglia. The roads there were narrow and dark. The houses were spread apart. At night, headlights were often the only clear thing on the road. Sometime around 11:30 p.m., Zanfretta reached Casa Nostra. The villa belonged to a local dentist. It should have been locked. But when Zanfretta arrived, the gate was open. So was the front door. To him, the first explanation was obvious. Someone had broken in. Zanfretta radioed his supervisor. He reported what he had found. Then he moved closer to the property. This was the part of the job that mattered. A guard could not simply see an open door and drive away. He had to check. He had to find out whether someone was inside. As he entered the garden area, he noticed lights. Not the normal light from a room, not headlights from the road. According to his later account, there were several unusual lights in the garden. At first, he thought they might be flashlights. That would fit the burglary theory. If thieves were inside, they might be moving around the property with torches. So he continued forward. Then the situation changed. Behind the villa, he later claimed, there was an object. Large, oval-shaped, red, resting low near the ground. The detail is strange. But in the first moments, it is important to stay with what Zanfretta believed was happening. He was alone. He was in a dark garden. He had been called by an open gate and an open door. He expected people. Burglars. Men. Something he could understand. Instead, he said he saw something else. He turned, and there, near the house, he claimed he saw several figures. They were tall, far taller than normal people. He later described them as having rough, uneven skin, strange eyes, and feet that did not look human. Those descriptions would become famous later, but the strongest part of the case is not the full description. It is what happened immediately. Zanfretta called for help. His supervisor could hear panic in his voice. Then came the question, was he being attacked by men? Zanfretta's answer was not long. It was not dramatic. It did not sound prepared. No, they are not men. Then the radio went silent. When the radio contact ended, Zanfretta's colleagues understood that something was wrong. A security guard might lose signal. He might be busy. He might forget to respond for a moment. But this was different. He had been shouting. He had said something was there. Then he had stopped answering. A team was sent to Casa Nostra. The area around the villa was dark and quiet when they arrived. There was no crowd. No sign of a fight still happening. No group of burglars running down the road. They found Zanfretta outside the villa. He was lying on the ground. He was either unconscious or nearly unconscious. He appeared to be in deep shock. His gun was not where it should have been. For the people who found him, this was not the behavior of a man calmly making up a story. Whatever the cause was, Zanfretta had been badly frightened. The police were later informed. The case reached the Carabinieri. The villa and its garden were examined. One of the details recorded was a flattened area in the grass. It was described as a semicircular mark. To people who believed Zanfretta, it became one of the most important pieces of the story. A possible trace, a sign that something large had been in the garden. But from the beginning, that detail was not simple. A mark in grass does not prove a craft. It does not prove visitors. It only proves that the grass had been flattened, and later skeptics would argue that it may have had an ordinary cause. That is what makes this case difficult. It is not built on one clean piece of proof. It is built on fragments. A radio call, a frightened man, a strange mark, a missing weapon, an open villa, and a sentence that did not sound like a normal burglary report. The morning after the incident, the story began to spread. At first, it was local. A guard had seen something. He had been found in shock. There were strange lights. Then more people began to talk. Reports came in from the surrounding area. Some people claimed they had seen unusual lights in the sky around the same night. The Carabinieri reportedly collected dozens of accounts of strange events between Torriglia and Propata. But this part of the case has to be treated carefully. Witness reports become difficult once a story becomes public. People hear a strange report, then remember something they saw earlier. A distant light becomes important. A noise becomes connected. A normal event becomes part of a pattern. That does not mean every witness was wrong. It means the evidence becomes harder to judge. Still, the reports gave the case weight. Zanfretta was no longer just one frightened guard with a strange story. Now there were lights, other witnesses, a police file, a property that could be examined, a place on a map. And in Italy, the story began moving quickly. Journalists became interested. Newspapers picked it up. Soon, the man from the hills above Genoa was not only a night watchman, he was the center of a national mystery. Zanfretta's later description of the figures was hard for many people to accept. He said they were around 3 meters tall. He described strange eyes, strange skin, feet that did not look human. To some, it sounded like a clear description of something non-human. To others, it sounded like fear, darkness, and memory turning an unclear shape into a monster. Both views matter, because the night was not filmed. There was no clear photograph, no body, no object recovered from the scene that could prove what he saw. There was only his account, and his condition afterward. That condition is one reason the case lasted. People who met Zanfretta after the incident often described him as genuinely shaken, not excited, not proud, not like a man enjoying a joke, shaken. This does not prove his story was true. A person can be sincerely terrified and still be wrong about what caused the terror, but it makes the case harder to dismiss as a simple performance. If it was a hoax, it began with a man screaming into a radio and being found on the ground. If it was a mistake powerful enough to change his life. And if it was something else, then Casa Nostra became the place where an ordinary patrol turned into something far more disturbing. After the first incident, the case moved into a more controversial phase. Zanfretta agreed to undergo hypnosis. At the time, this made the story even more dramatic. The idea was simple. If he could not remember everything clearly, perhaps hypnosis could help him recover what happened. But today, this is one of the weakest parts of the case. Hypnosis is not a recording. It does not replay the past like a film. It can create confidence in memories that may not be accurate. It can also make a person more open to suggestion. So when Zanfretta gave more detailed accounts under hypnosis, those details became controversial. For believers, hypnosis revealed what had been hidden. For skeptics, hypnosis damaged the case. Because the more detailed the story became, the harder it was to separate memory from suggestion. Under hypnosis, Zanfretta reportedly described being taken aboard a craft. He described bright rooms, painful procedures, more detailed beings. And later, a larger story began to form around the original event. This is where a serious telling must slow down. The first report and the later hypnotic accounts are not the same kind of evidence. The first report happened during the event. The later accounts came after media attention, fear, questions, and hypnosis. The first report was simple. A villa. A garden. Figures. A radio call. They are not men. Everything after that became harder to prove, disturbing. If the story had ended after one night, it may have faded. But it did not end. On December 27, 1978, only a few weeks later, Zanfretta disappeared again while on duty. This time, the weather was bad. Fog and rain made the search harder. According to reports, he radioed that his car had stopped. Then, contact became difficult. For over an hour, searchers looked for him. When he was found, he was near a mountain road, not far from his vehicle. Again, he appeared deeply shocked. Again, there were details that became part of the mystery. His clothes were said to be dry. His body was reportedly warm despite the cold weather. Large marks near the scene were described by some as unusual footprints. For believers, this was another sign that something had happened to him. For skeptics, each detail had a possible ordinary explanation. Dry clothes could mean he had spent time inside the car. Warmth could come from shelter. The marks in the ground could be puddles or natural impressions. But to those who knew the first incident, the second one felt like a repeat. Same man, same fear, same region, same strange pattern. The case no longer looked like one frightening mistake. It looked like something following him. By this point, Zanfretta's life had changed. He was no longer only a guard. He was a headline. Some people believed him. Some mocked him. Some wanted interviews. Some wanted explanations. For a private person, that kind of attention can be damaging, especially when the story attached to your name sounds impossible. Zanfretta continued to say the encounters were real. He later claimed the beings returned more than once. Over time, the claims grew larger. More incidents, more memories, more details. But the larger the story became, the more divided people became. Some saw consistency. Others saw a legend growing out of control. The security company eventually had to respond to the attention and the repeated incidents. His work situation changed. Later, his gun license was reportedly revoked, which affected his ability to continue as a guard. That detail matters, because whatever happened, the story did not simply give him fame. It cost him something. A hoax usually has a clear benefit: money, control, status. Here, the result was messier. Attention came, yes, but so did ridicule, pressure, and damage to his working life. That does not prove he was telling the truth. But it does make the case more human. Behind the strange claims was a man whose ordinary life had been pulled into something he could no longer escape. There are good reasons to doubt parts of the Zanfretta case. A serious case file cannot ignore them. The hypnosis is the first problem. Skeptics argue that it may have shaped or added to the story instead of uncovering the truth. The physical evidence is another problem. The flattened grass at Casa Nostra may have had an ordinary explanation. Some later claims about marks or footprints may have been misread. The witness reports of lights in the sky were never strong enough to prove one clear event, and the late 1970s were filled with science fiction imagery. Television, comics, films, newspapers. If a frightened man later tried to explain something he did not understand, his mind may have used images already common in the culture around him. That is a reasonable argument. It cannot be brushed aside. But the skeptical file also has a weak point. It explains the later story better than the first night. It can explain the hypnosis. It can explain the media. It can explain why the story grew. But it still has to explain the beginning. Why did a guard on duty report a possible burglary, then suddenly panic? Why did he say the figures were not men? Why was he found outside in shock? Why did the case become serious enough for police attention? The skeptical answer may still be correct, but it is not clean, and that is why the first night remains the strongest part of the story. For those who believe Zanfretta, the case has several important points. He was working. He was not seeking fame before the incident. He reported the situation in real time. He sounded terrified. He was found in a disturbed condition. The police became involved. Other people reportedly described strange lights in the area, and the later incidents seemed to repeat the pattern. To believers, these details suggest that something real happened. Not a dream, not a simple lie, not a story invented years later. Something at Casa Nostra frightened him badly, and he never fully escaped it. But belief also has a problem. The strongest claim is also the hardest to prove. If something non-human really appeared at the villa, there should be evidence stronger than memory, grass marks, and witness reports. There should be something solid, something that could be tested, something that would not depend on interviews and recollections. That evidence never came. So the believer's file remains powerful as a story, but weak as proof. And the skeptical file remains strong in criticism, but incomplete in explaining the first radio call. Between those two files is where the Zanfretta case still lives. Casa Nostra was not a haunted castle. It was not an ancient ruin. It was not a place already famous for legends. It was a private villa. That makes the case more unsettling. Because many strange stories begin in places that already look like myths: old forests, abandoned hospitals, caves, ruins. But this began at a house, a gate, a garden, a normal property on a normal patrol route. That is why the story works. It does not begin with someone looking for the paranormal. It begins with someone looking for burglars. That difference matters. Zanfretta did not drive to Casa Nostra expecting a mystery. He drove there because something was open that should have been closed. And when he stepped out of the car, the world he expected did not match the world he later described. Maybe he misread it. Maybe fear changed it. Maybe the later story covered the original event with too much legend. But the first detail remains simple. The gate was open. The door was open. And inside that silence, something made him call for help. Many UFO cases fade because they are too vague. A light in the sky, a shape above a field, a witness who comes forward years later. The Zanfretta case lasted because it had structure, A specific date, a specific place, a named witness, a work shift, a radio call, a police response, a second incident, a public argument, and a sentence people could remember. They are not men. That sentence is not proof. But it is the reason the case became difficult to forget. It is simple. It is immediate. It sounds like fear before a story becomes polished. And for a channel like ours, that is where the real darkness is. Not in proving aliens landed in Italy, not in pretending every claim is true, but in looking at the exact point where a normal night broke open. Before the hypnosis, before the cameras, before the books, there was a man alone in a garden, and whatever he saw, it changed the way he spoke. The official world never accepted Zanfretta's story as proof of visitors from somewhere else. Skeptics found problems, believers found patterns, the media found a mystery, and the public found a story that was frightening enough to survive. Today, the case is still argued over. Some people see it as one of Italy's most important alleged encounters. Others see it as a lesson in fear, memory, and suggestion. Both sides can point to details that help them. Neither side can close the file completely. That is why the first night remains the center of everything. Not the later claims, not the hypnosis, not the mythology that grew around the case. The first night. December 6th, 1978. A cold road near Torriglia, an open gate at Casa Nostra, a security guard stepping into a garden, a radio call filled with panic, and a supervisor asking if he was being attacked by men. The answer came back once, then the line went dead. No, they are not men